Start here.
There we go.
Okay, right before I click the go live button here, I'm just going to go ahead and make sure if there are any other necessities I need to address. I don't see a waiting room or anything like that. Jay, did you see anything like that before you were?
There was a green button that said, basically click this to go live. You're in a practice session, but
right. And we're beyond
clearly
that.
I wasn't going to. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, with that said, then I'm going to go ahead and launch it and we'll get started. Okay.
All right.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening for the Michigan Music Alliance B-side session on building a brand. We're thrilled to be here this evening. I've got a couple of guests with me here. I'll introduce in just a moment. But first, I want to say on behalf of all musicians everywhere, just a general thank you to a general thank you to the Michigan Music Alliance. The Michigan Music Alliance exists solely to support Michigan music, and as a musician myself, I can't think of a better thing to be supportive of and a better organization. So thank you first and foremost to the Michigan Music Alliance. If you're not familiar with the B-side sessions, these are free music business advice. It is 100% to help you along with your career, and this is this is the third in a series. And tonight we're going to be talking about branding. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests now. First up, from Label Logic, we have Jay Gilbert. Jay, how you doing this evening?
Very well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Good. I'm glad that you're here with us. And then also, I'd like to introduce James Downs. Am I saying that right?
Yep, James Downs.
Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start very, very first and very basic. James, I think, why don't you go ahead and lead this off of what is branding?
Branding. So it can be a lot of things, but the way that I see it, branding to me feels like the process of looking deeply at yourself or at your project to discover like what are your unique attributes, and in discovering them, how can you communicate those things in a way that people can easily understand and identify with. Basically telling the world who you are in a succinct and accurate way, and giving them the opportunity to be like, I'm a person that identifies with this, or I'm a person who does not identify with that. So that's kind of my understanding of what branding is.
Excellent. Jay, I'd like to ask you the same question, just in your own words. What is branding?
Well, I think that James is spot on. It's really important today, starting with the narrative. Like, why should anybody care, right? When you have to enter music into Spotify's submission tool, if you're creating a bio or a press release, what is the narrative? And today, it's not just the narrative about the band or the artist, it's about each focus track. So that speaks to the brand. Who are you? And something that James touched on reminded me of one of my favorite authors is Seth Godin. And he'll always say, people like us do things like this. People like us do things like this. Think about who is your tribe? Who is your audience? And that's where you start with your brand. Branding is so important. And there's ways to discover what your brand is if you don't know. And there's ways to look at other artists, like competitive artists, to see what is their brand. And the final thing I'll say on it is branding is so important that I believe, as a photographer, for example, that you should be able to look at an image of an artist and hear the music. And I think with proper branding, you can do that.
Nice.
Did we lose you, Nicholas?
We did not. I'm sorry.
Okay, good. That's all right.
Was checking on the Facebook feed, and I'll get back to that in just a
All
moment.
good. All good.
It's probably worth mentioning that I did not introduce myself, and so I guess I'm gonna do
Please.
that. Real
Yeah,
quick.
who are you, bud? Who are you?
Yeah.
I also realized that when I first signed in, it said my name was Elle Lively, and I am not. She's far lovelier than myself, and a much more tech savvy. On top of that, she would have changed her name before the Zoom meeting started. But thanks to Elle for facilitating the B-side sessions in the Michigan Music Alliance. My name is Nicholas James Thomasma, and I am a singer-songwriter that is based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I'm also a member of the Earthwork Music Collective, and I'm a board member for a nonprofit folk arts organization called Folk Alliance Region Midwest. On top of all those many other things there, most people around here know me as the guy that drives around in the bright orange 1973 Volkswagen bus.
Nice.
I'm the VW bus guy in the group.
Well played, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. It's kind of one of those things that if you don't know anything else about me, you probably know that I have a Volkswagen bus. That's like the broad and general fact about me, and that is not by accident. That is called branding.
I was going to say, well branded.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. And with that said, it appears, in my imaging, on my merchandise. It's on my latest album cover here is the Volkswagen bus on the front and the back. And so, I mean, it permeates the scene of what I'm doing here.
Sure.
And that's what a brand is. It's your image, or your logo, your colors, your fonts, those are the things that people associate with your brand, your look and your style, and its most basic terms. So I guess my next question is, are bands brands?
Who do you want to kick it off?
Jay, why don't you go ahead and take this one?
Absolutely, they're brands. 100% they're brands, whether you know it or not. If you look historically, look at things like the Rolling Stones' famous, tongue logo, or, the Kiss logo, or Cheap Trick, or whoever. These are things that have become, a mega brand, in and of themselves. But I think an artist, whether they want to or not, they are a brand. And it's like, what's the old Rush line? If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. You may not choose to be a brand, but, I think inherently artists, bands are brands. It just depends on, how far do you want to take that, and how individual do you want it to be, and how do you want it to speak to who you are? How authentic do you want it to be?
Cool. Yeah. When the Rush line that you quoted there, that really resonates with me. Just in the sense of like me coming up in the punk rock scene in the New England area, and a lot of discussion about, these sort of topics like branding. Is it up to punk code to brand yourself? And it's, these rules and things like that. And, I hear a statement like that, and that really resonates, because it's like in your rejection of branding, or in your rejection of any of these types of concepts, you are in fact adopting a very strong position on the topic. In my opinion, bands are absolutely brands, and they are the coolest brands out there. I don't think there is any better example of a brand that I remember drawing logos on my textbooks in seventh grade, like the Wu-Tang W, or the Weezer symbol, also W. That's kind of cool. And more than just the visual aspect of it, bands are brands in a sense that they are a narrative in progress. They are an entire world. They're a story. Like, where did they come from? What was the upbringing of the members? You know, when you tell your friends about a band, you don't just say like, yeah, they play rock and roll. You're like, oh, well, it's this gal that, you know, she got arthritis and couldn't play piano anymore. So she formed this punk band where she's the lead singer and she's just screaming her brains out. It's like, it's a story. So bands are brands.
I agree with that. I would only add that it's also, to your point, James, it's a community. You know, if you can tie that brand in with a community, you know, when you go see Jimmy Buffett, you know, or you're a Parrot Head, you know, you're part of this group of people,
right?
You go see the Grateful Dead or whoever it is, you're part of this community. And that has to do, I think, a lot with branding. If branding is done, you know, properly and deliberately, you know, you associate with that. You want to wear the merch. You want to have the poster on the wall. You know, you want to go there and bring your friends there and be an evangelist for it, because now you've got some ownership. You're a part of that community.
Yep. Very cool.
That's great. I think there's a couple of things that you said in there that I really latch onto, which one of them was bands are the coolest brands, because they are. It's the coolest thing ever. And you know, you mentioned, you know, the notebooks and stuff, and that's like in the opening scene from Almost Famous, the greatest rock and roll movie of all time. He's like drawing, you know, the bands on his, and I did that same thing. I think that's a very excellent point about branding, is that bands are the coolest brands. And then also the other thing that you said was, you know, there's a narrative to it. It's a story. How important is the story in the brand?
Well, I'll speak first, just quickly. I think the narrative, you know, as I kind of kicked it off, to me, it's the most important thing, because everything comes from that narrative. And James said something really important, and that is, there are things about you may not know that they're important. But I like to ask artists and artist managers, if you had 20 seconds, 30 seconds in an elevator to tell, you know, somebody from a sync licensing company or a long lead press or somebody who books TV shows or a tour agent, whatever it is, what are you going to tell them about you as an artist and about your release? And it can't be, you know, hey, I'm Jay, I've got this new single out. Is it aspirational? Is it something, have I overcome adversity? What is the narrative, the story around that? You know, one of my favorite stories is one of the first albums I ever bought was Cheap Trick's first album, their debut album. And when you pull it out, the vinyl out of the sleeve, there's their logo. But if you flip it over, it's covered with text. And it's a narrative about the band and how they formed and their relationships and their how they've won certain things and how they didn't win certain things. But it's like almost all made up. Now, I'm not saying that you should make up your narrative. In fact, I think it has to be genuine, but people are lazy. Publicists are lazy. Not all of them, but a lot of places ran with that story because they could just print it. So if you have a good narrative in your bio and press release and everybody is on the same page. So let's say, you know, let's take James and the End of America, for example. Let's say he's come up with a narrative, but then his manager knows that narrative, the publicist, the booking agent, I know that narrative. All the team knows that narrative. Now, no matter who you ask about the End of America, it's consistent across the board of what that message is. And that can be really powerful.
Yeah, very, very cool. The narrative is just super important for bands. You know, my favorite groups that I think about, I have, you know, like they've implanted their story in me, that like you're saying, Jay, where it's like, you know what your story is, your team knows your story, and that is what you put out to the world because you tell people who you are. They don't tell you who you are, you know, as the audience, they're not telling you who you are. You are telling them who you are. And I think about some of my favorite artists as of late. like Father John Misty, for example, where it's like, yeah, he was in Fleet Foxes playing drums, and then he went off into the desert, did mushrooms for a couple of weeks, and then came out with this alter ego and made this project, Father John Misty. It's like, there's the narrative.
Great narrative.
Yeah. It's like, it doesn't get better than that, you know?
Yeah.
And if you think of like the alternative, like you were saying, Jay, it's like, you aren't just, I'm Jane Doe and I started playing music 5 years ago and I'm from DC, you know? If it's something more along the lines of like, after years of battling with crippling depression, I found that songwriting saved my life, and the process of making this album is my rebirth, or something like that, that there's just something to latch onto, so that if someone were to communicate your story to somebody else, like you're saying in an elevator or something, that they could do it just like that. And it sticks, because stories are part of our, you know, biology. You know, that's how we've communicated for eons.
100%. You know, I have this artist that we work with called Dozat Saint Marie, and Heather has overcome breast cancer, and they've done a video about 1 in 8 women getting breast cancer. And it became, for that release, it became the narrative, and it was a powerful narrative, and that song and the video will bring you to your knees, and it doesn't have to define you. And these narratives can change from release to release. But overall, it also shows that she overcomes adversity. She's a strong woman. She's helpful with other people. I mean, even males can get breast cancer. I worked with Peter Criss, the drummer for Kiss. He got breast cancer as a male, and nobody knew that that was a thing. So these are really powerful narratives. If you can help people, if you can do things that promote, let's say you're a woman in this business and you support other women and you promote strong women, those are super powerful narratives that can speak to your brand and make it authentic.
Yeah, that seems to me 101 of tribe building, that it's all about the narrative and people feeling whether or not they identify with your narrative as something that resonates with them. And before we leave the topic, if we are, I just wanted to say that that's an awesome thing that you say about, you can change your narrative from release to release, or it can evolve. One of the biggest trip ups that people that I work with in my musician consulting project that I've got going on is feeling like they need to marry their branding choices, and we can evolve from release to release, and that is a really powerful thing to know. So I love that you said that, Jay. That's
Thanks.
cool.
Thanks.
Right. Well, that goes back to the story, right? I mean, a good story does evolve over time, and there should be different elements to the story that would come out through time to time. So I guess with that said, then, you know, how much is it okay to change your brand from release to release?
Well, look at some of these artists like Madonna and Lady Gaga and David Bowie, and we could go on and on and on, that change, like the weather and their look, their feel, their sound, their narrative. If that is true and genuine to you, then yeah. But then there are some people who, you know, maybe it's James Taylor, where he's kind of had that same James Taylor narrative, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think it depends on you as an artist or your band, how you're evolving. I think people are looking for things that are real, and they can smell a fake a mile away. And if you say you're something that you're not, I don't think you can get away with that today. I think you need to find what makes you special, what lights you up, what is part of who you are. Then it's not work. You're just being yourself.
Yeah. That's the idea of an artist changing their branding pretty drastically from album cycle to album cycle. I love that vibe. I mean, I'm looking at your posters there, Jay, and I'm seeing like the Beatles, for example, like
Yeah.
every 8 months they had like a completely different wardrobe, you know, but it felt authentic. And
Yeah.
you know, there are bands that are doing that, and I think that that's awesome. But there are bands, like you say, like James Taylor is a great example. Maybe like the Foo Fighters or something. Their branding is pretty steady. You know, it has evolved, their colors, their imagery, all that sort of stuff. Perhaps it's evolved, but for them, you know, you're not seeing them hop out on a different album cycle and they're like all hippied out now or something, you know. So to answer the question, Nicholas, I think that it's acceptable to rebrand drastically if, like Jay's saying, that is true to you and you are the type of artist and person that you can rock that new brand with confidence. Then album cycle to album cycle, it's cool. But if you feel at home with something, then it can be tough to, and people can smell a fake. So maybe there is no one answer to that, but yeah.
Well, I'm sure there's no one answer to that. But I mean, as far as that goes, I think Bowie is a great example. The Beatles are another great example that if changing your image and changing your sound, if you do it frequently like that, it becomes part of your brand, and people
if you do it well,
looking at you like, what comes next? What are they going to do next?
Yeah. An interesting example of that going on right now. And what do you guys think about Brandi Carlile's recent rebrand? Have you seen that going on?
And see, I like it because it kind of shocks the system a little bit. It's not what you expect. And I think of it in terms of some of my favorite songwriters, like Neil Finn, for example. He does a Crowded House thing, and then, you know, he does something else, and it's like, yeah, that's not as good as the Crowded House thing. But then over time, that new thing becomes my favorite. Then he does something with his brother, and like, it's not as good as the solo thing. And then after a while, you peel through the layers, and now that becomes my favorite thing. And I think that's the Beatles in some regard too. You love those mop tops, you know, and then as they kind of evolved, you're like, oh, really? You know, they're like hippies now or whatever. But, you know, you can lead your audience along, again, if it's authentic and genuine. So we've all seen kind of the cliche artist that just goes more makeup, more cleavage, more this or that. And that's to me, that's a little boring and is low hanging fruit. I think it's better when they challenge you in the directions that they go. But again, if that's true to your kind of music, if you're, you know, James Taylor, that probably might not work as well as it would.
Part, at least.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that said, then what if you don't know what your brand is? What if you're like trying, you know, that seems to be a common question, is like, well, who do you sound like? Right. And then this would be like the next step is, you know, what separates you from everybody else, and how do bands go about establishing those types of things?
Well, you just asked, like, you know, what is your brand if you don't know what your brand is? And I would say that's probably true with a lot of artists, if not most of them, is, you know, trying to find what is your brand. What I like to talk to developing artists when they're putting out music for the first time and they're really not sure about those things, I ask them questions like, who do you see yourself collaborating with? Who do you see yourself maybe opening for? You know, what kind of places, you know, what kind of publications do you see yourself and your music being talked about? And after a little bit of that, you start getting an idea of kind of where they feel they are. And then, you know, as a photographer, I can tell you it's so important for imagery, not just photography, but imagery in general. Like, if you're going to put out a focus track, or you're going to put out an EP or an album, whatever it is, what is that imagery that you feel comfortable with that really kind of goes hand in hand with your music? And it could be as simple as just going on Pinterest and looking around at things that light you up and you go, oh my God, I love that. You know, you can find your brand, I think, by doing some of those things.
Cool. Yeah. Looking at other artists that you would want to share a bill with, that's certainly a great way. Because like you're saying, you can look into what they're doing, and you can start to notice patterns in their narratives, and and understanding who their tribes are. And if you feel like that is also your tribe, then you can learn things. And there's enough space in the music world that you're not stealing somebody else's fans, so you can learn things from another band in pursuit of attracting their fans as well. You're not going to take them from that band. So that is certainly a great way to go about discovering your brand, just looking at the other bands that are in your circle. Yeah. And another way to build your brand, find your brand, would be to kind of just look at yourself as a person and as an artist and think, like, what are the principles that you stand for morally, or just in life? Like, who are you? What are you trying to put across? Like, are you all about living in the moment? Are you all about empowering people? Are you all about having a good time? Like, whatever, social justice, like understanding those core principles about yourself can help you form the core of your artist project and kind of work outwards. And I think that it's those principles that attract the tribe the most. Those are the things that people will say, I identify with this, or I don't identify with this, which ultimately is what I think branding is all about. So deep reflection, I think, is another way to start finding your brand and understanding who you are as a person and artist, and being able to get some of those core principles out on paper and seeing, that's it. Those are the three things that I stand for. It's a great place to start.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I've worked a little bit with jazz artists. And the one thing that surprises me about working with jazz artists is you see that kind of cliche thing. This is me with my instrument.
Yeah.
I play stand-up bass. I play violin. I play cello. And it seems to be kind of a thing with branding and jazz. But every now and then you get somebody like Kamasi Washington, and the cover of his album is him standing on water, no instrument, no text on the actual vinyl, for example, or on the image that you see on DSPs. One thing that people forget sometimes is that 85% of our business is streaming. And when you use a streaming service, they're going to list the artist and the title underneath the image.
Right.
So you don't necessarily have to have that there. If you want it on your vinyl, it could be a sticker on the outside. And the reason I bring that up is when it comes to branding, what a great, canvas for you to brand yourself, that vinyl album cover or that CD cover or that image online. And, even artists like Taylor Swift have releases now with no text on them. It's just, beautiful photography. So I would encourage, my friends that are in jazz, try to step away from here's me with my instrument. And as a photographer, there are a couple of things that drive me crazy. The cliche shot of here I am on the railroad tracks. Here I am with a brick wall. All four of us are standing like this, And what we've tried to do, like I did a couple of shoots recently. If you look at the new album by Immediate Family, or you look at the new latest album by The Temptations, you'll see that there's movement. And the way that I shot those is they're walking through the mark, and they're not just standing there like this. And the reason I bring that up is you've got all these different canvases that you can, put forth your brand. You don't have to do it like everybody else. You don't have to sit there, this is my saxophone, I play sax.
Well, that's an interesting point, and to you mentioned jazz, but I don't think that jazz is it's exclusive to jazz. I think that there is a romanticism with also rock and roll bands, and probably many others too. This idea of mystique, about there's some great example, like Radiohead is a great example of a lot of their music. Well, I don't know anything about any of those guys. And Tool was another band that they don't put their photos in their albums, and And is mystique still a thing? Is that something that you can still brand and be successful with?
Mm. Well, it's certainly a different game now than when those guys were coming up. Um, how do you think that Radiohead or Tool would have curated an Instagram account during the height of their, when Kid A came out or something like that, at their most mysterious? Or um, that's a really good question. So I think of who's doing it well now. Justin Vernon, Bon Iver. There's definitely a mystique to that project. I believe that every photo that comes out of him these days doesn't show his face. Like if you look at his Spotify photo, it's not his whole face. Or the press photo for Big Red Machine, his band with Aaron Dessner. Aaron Dessner's face is fully exposed, but Justin Vernon's is covered. But yeah, or in the Taylor Swift documentary about the making of Folklore, his scene, he was wearing a bandana over his face while he was recording. So there is still a place for mystique, and people are still doing it. Although the game has changed because, people want to be closer to the artists in their social media.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that. I think that it works for some. It's not going to work for all. But as we touched on before, we're visual beings, whether it's still images and artwork like we just talked about. But let's take a look at video and how important that is to today's music business. It's not just having a concept video, which is what they did in the 80s and 90s. And then maybe it was an unplugged or a live. Well, today we have all of those, and we have, lyric videos and pseudo videos, which is just the album art and the audio bed. But more importantly, now we're doing 8-second edits for a Spotify canvas. We're doing 15-second Instagram stories ads that drive to Spotify. We're doing teaser. I mean, you almost need to have a creative director today. And with all of that, right, does it have to be your face? No, it could be really great imagery. It could be artwork. There are bands out there that, aren't personalities. They're animated. We've seen that for years. And you're seeing TV shows now based on people, it's more of an avatar that's performing, that's in the spotlight. That's their brand. That's not right for everyone, but I don't think there's a wrong answer, whether it's scarcity. There was a time back in the 70s where Kiss would never be photographed without makeup. And they went, like for a decade like that. And that became this really great narrative that people talked about. And there are certain people that, outside of a release cycle, Adele has been very good at not overexposing herself on socials, for example. And this is what I had for breakfast. And, for some people, if you're BTS, you're going to want to have those images. That's your bread and butter. And those brand partnerships and those photographs and those videos and all of that, because that's your base. But for other folks, I think scarcity is a good thing.
Yeah. When you're talking about the narrative, it is that mystique part of your narrative as an artist. And if it is, then, reflecting it in the way that you put yourself across on all your platforms. If it's not, the photos that don't tell any stories, they just communicate nothing. And that's watered down branding, and you have missed an opportunity to send a message to somebody. That it's not even as if somebody's going to be like, I'm not going to like this. They're just like, we're all in defense mode because there's so much stuff coming at us down the pike. It will just be invisible to you. You just will glean over it, and then that's it. Yeah. So yeah.
I think you need to grab people. I'm a big fan of grabbing people. I read this stat one time that 85% of videos watched on Facebook are watched with the sound off. People are flipping through their feeds. Mm-hmm. And so you want to, people, to James's point, the attention span now is short. The tolerance for, you know, something that's not entertaining is short. But I think one of the things, a point I'd like to make, because it's one of the few things that I've found that really works consistently, and that is consistency, meaning that when you have images, artwork, photos, when you have something that really speaks to who you are as an artist, and let's say you're putting out a new track, well, make sure that it's consistent across, you know, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, all your socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. Make sure that wherever you have people experiencing who you are, that branding is consistent across the board. I've watched bands like U2 who were really early on in this, you know, when they would do a tour around an album, that artwork, that imagery would be everywhere, across everything that they do. And I think that can amplify that message a little bit.
Cool. Yeah, like everybody is seeing the same story across all those platforms, that it's cohesive. And you, in doing that, you are allowing your observer, your potential fan, to feel confident in the fact that they can grasp what you're about. That people want to feel confident that they understand you, that they can categorize you in some place in their brain, not necessarily pigeonhole you, but that they understand you. They don't want to be, you know, blasted out having no idea what the hell you're about. People want to know that they understand what you're trying to put across, and having that consistency across all those platforms certainly goes a really long way in, you know, making people feel smart. They want to feel good that they, you know, that they get it, that they get you. So
yeah,
it's an easy way to do that.
Yeah.
You know, today there are so many channels, so many platforms, and so many social media networks. You know, how important is it to be on all the networks? You know, you talk about having your brand consistent across all the platforms. Do you need to be active on every platform out there?
I don't think you do. I'd love to hear what James thinks, but I can tell you that what we tell artists and have for years is look at what you're good at, look at what your strengths are, and work that. If you're really good at Instagram and you're not so good with Twitter, it's not really your thing. And sometimes people will hire a team to do those things so they can be everywhere. But I'm going to speak out of the other side of my mouth now and say that we always say you go to where the party is. So if the party's on YouTube, which is the #1 music streaming service, not Spotify by a mile, you should probably have a presence there. You should probably be growing subscribers and have engagement there. If that's not your strength, maybe there's somebody on your street team. You know, maybe it's your girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, sister. You know, as you're getting going as a developing artist, you're not going to be able to hire someone to handle those things in your voice, and you may not want to. But I think you don't have to be on everything. I mean, it's just so much to put on an artist today to try to do that and write and record and tour and everything else, that I think you need to find what your strengths are and look to your street team, look to the band. Maybe there's somebody in the band who's really good at one of the platforms. As long as that messaging is consistent. And the last thing I'll say on it is it can't be too selly. I think a mistake that artists make sometimes is everything they post is buy my album, see my show, buy my album, see my show. If you talk to the experts in social media, they will not take the 80-20 rule. They'll go 90-10, that 90% of what you post should be, this is what I believe in. This is a conversation that I'm having with James. James may say, hey, you guys, we're playing in Los Angeles next week. What do you think should be on the set list? Hey, I heard about this new thing. What do you think about it? You know, I'm going to play you some of my, you know, some new music. I'd love to get your thoughts. You know, having that dialogue back and forth actually feeds the algorithm a little bit with a lot of socials when they see that you're not just posting a link. Because if you just post a link to your smart URL or to your music or YouTube onto, let's say, Facebook, for example, they see that as you're taking traffic and bringing it somewhere else, right? So if you can engage your audience, you know, where they live and breathe, I think that's important. And just to reiterate, I don't think you have to be on every single platform. Find out what you do well and own it.
Cool. That the perfect alley-oop there for me, Jay. Thank you. Because I just wanted to mention when you say go to where your audience lives and breathes, not all spectrums of the population, music consuming population, exist on every platform. You know, it's a demographic based situation. There are not a lot of I don't know specifically what it is, but you know, let's say younger people are on TikTok, older people are on Facebook. Instagram is kind of a mishmash, but I mean, at one point it definitely leaned younger, but now there's a broad range of folks on there. But from a branding perspective, knowing who your target demographic is, knowing who your target audience is going to save you so much time. Like if your audience is 55 plus, you probably and you are not excited about TikTok. That's the caveat.
Yeah.
If you're not excited about it and your audience is not there, you probably don't need to put much time there.
Agreed.
Yeah, go to where your audience lives and breathes, and focus on your strengths. What is effortless to you? So that would be my what I would say. Just those two things. Those great points, Jay.
Thank you. I would just add to that. I agree with everything you said there. I think what happens is when you speak to artist managers specifically, they know who their band's audience is about 80%. There's always things that they don't know. Why? Because there's not one audience. There's three audiences, right? There's commerce, sales streams and downloads. Then there's touring, the butts in the seats. And that may not always align with the commerce. And then you have the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all of that. The great thing today is you can go and look and learn so much about who your audience is. You don't even have to be touring. I mean, you could be, but look at, your YouTube analytics, look at your Spotify for artists, Apple Music for artists, Amazon Music for artists, look at your socials. I mean, Facebook has some pretty cool analytics. If you're there, most of these platforms have on the back end, they can tell you who your audience is, what time of day they're doing, what they're doing, maybe what kind of device they're on, those types of things. You can use platforms like Chartmetric and Viberate and Sound Charts and platforms like that to really learn about who your tribe is. And I think what James said is probably the most important thing of all of this, and that is, who is your audience? Who is your tribe? That's going to directly affect your branding. Because if you're appealing to an older demo, you're not going to want to brand yourself as something that they're not going to relate to, right? So I think it all comes to play all together, but you really need to know who your tribe is.
Well, let's say, I go and I look at my analytics and I see that on TikTok, not surprisingly, my viewers are a younger audience. And then I go on Instagram and I see my users, my viewers on Instagram tend to be more middle-aged people. And then I go on Facebook and I see that my average age is 65 and up and so how then do I establish which one of those is my audience?
Well, I think you look at all of your audiences, and that's where you find out. You rarely see that they're young on one, middle on the other, and old on the other. What you typically see is kind of this bell curve. And when you look at, yes, TikTok does skew younger. It's the easiest platform to get video views and the hardest one to get real engagement and to move the needle across other platforms. So you can tell that TikTok does really well, of course, with dance challenges, and they do really well with, certain genres and moods of music. I think you look at your particular audience, because we do audience analysis on a lot of different artists, and typically they're similar across the board, but you'll learn little things about, maybe something that you post really took off on one platform and didn't on another. And then you can use targeted online advertising to reach those people if you want. But I don't think it's ever going to be as drastic as, as you describe.
I defer to the king of data. Jay is nobody can mess with this guy when it comes to that. So yeah, I'm with you on all of that.
All right. Well, let's take it to a kind of a different direction here, and I'll bring up a Michigan band, Grammy award-winning artist Greta Van Fleet, who has been, selling out venues and winning awards, and over and over and over again is being accused of being ripping off other bands or
you take that back.
Or sounding too much like other bands. And the question here is imitation a form of flattery? And how far can you go with wearing your influences on your sleeve before you're ripping somebody off?
Wow. That's a big question. I would never, point a finger at any artist about if they're genuine or not. Only they know that. I just know that when I'm older. So I grew up with Led Zeppelin, and when I hear that, to me, it sounds like Led Zeppelin. The vocal intonations, the sounds, of the drums and the guitars and things like that. And to me, it's not necessarily a horrible thing, but to me, it's derivative. But to somebody who's young that didn't grow up on Led Zeppelin albums, that's fresh. It's what's old is new again. And I got to be honest with you, I love hearing young bands play Bob Marley type music or John Coltrane type music and put their slant on it. Could it be derivative in some ways? Maybe, but as long as it's genuine, like I was talking to James earlier about The End of America. To me, they pull me back into this Crosby, Stills and Nash thing. And that's like comfort food to me. That's like a warm blanket or an old pair of jeans. I don't feel like they're ripping off Crosby, Stills and Nash, but it's okay that that's my entryway there. And I'm sure there's artists that you hear sometimes and you're like, you know what, I like this particular band, and wow, these guys sound a little bit like that. And it's kind of a nice way to pull you in. And then the last thing I'll say on it is that sometimes you just need that entree. And a lot of times it can be a cover song, like I may, see James live and they may do a cover of something. I'm like, wow, I love that, and that may bring me in to be curious to listen to more of that band. Right. So, I don't know about Greta Van Fleet, because that's kind of an extreme, they've taken a lot of heat, for sounding like another artist. I'm hoping that it's genuine, but I think as long as you're being true to who you are as an artist, if you sound or you remind people of another singer or guitarist and you're being genuine about it, well, that's okay.
Yeah. I say, let it rip. if you are not committing plagiarism, then let it rip. I think there's no better form of flattery. Like I was saying before, there's enough room for every band in the world to have fans. Like, we don't have a capacity to love, a limited capacity to love music. Just let it rip. And what Jay's saying with my band, The End of America, we set out knowing that Crosby, Stills and Nash was our North Star. And so to hear somebody say that back to us, I think like, yeah, all right, we're doing it. We're achieving what we wanted to achieve. And to be completely humble about it, it's like, there is no way we will ever sound exactly like Crosby, Stills and Nash. It's just not possible. And if we sound derivative of, that is an honor to me. I feel like life's too short. Let it rip. That's my thought. Create from the heart, like you said, Jay. Create from the heart and let it rip.
James, when you were saying, as long as you're not committing perjury or plagiary, or plagiarizing, whatever you said, I was thinking you were going to say, if you're not committing plagiary, you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah. What's the quote by Picasso?
Yeah.
Where it's like good artists or bad artists borrow, good artists steal. I forget what it is. It's
something like that. Yeah.
But
there's only so many notes. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yep.
Let her rip.
Let her rip.
Let her rip. That's a great way of putting it, I think. So, Jay, let me ask you, what do you think has been the most interesting trend of the last year or two?
In branding, I love how people are trying to stand apart. For example, if you look at an album or a track cover today, most people are looking at it on an iPhone. You know, they're looking at it postage stamp size. And the days of having intricate text and small things like that, it doesn't really work. What you need to do, what I've seen this trend is people creating album art, imagery, photos, whatever, that really pop. And what we do is we reduce the size of images and put them in a template to see what they look like small. And I love the trend, like I told you, with Kamasi Washington and Taylor Swift, where there's no text on the cover. That's kind of cool. I love people who use white space. They use creative to really draw attention to themselves. I'm also really enjoying how creative people are getting with videos. I love the trend with lyric videos where it's not just words flying across the screen, you know, like a teleprompter. It's really more art. And some of those videos get more engagement and more views than a concept video. I just think they're more engaging. We have so many distractions. We have so many things flying at us. If you can get someone to just stop for a second and look at your image, look at your video, whatever size form it comes in, I think then you win. There are 70,000 tracks uploaded every day to the DSPs, roughly. That's almost 500,000 a week. How are you going to rise above that, right? So we have 70 million tracks on most DSPs. So instead of blending in, I love the trend of people doing things that they're true to their brand, but they're easy to see amongst other things. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep. It's a difficult thing to stand out when, like you're saying, 85% of music consumption is happening on platforms where your album art is reduced to this tiny little thing.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Like one of the things that I really love, since it might not be this year, but since kind of the pandemic started and when our society went into this like different mode of self-expression and standing up for our moral principles, I like that is not a new thing by any means. But I do feel like the pendulum swings in terms of how acceptable or popular it is to kind of wear your ethos on your sleeve. And coming from hardcore and punk rock, that is why I got into music. And I can thank so many of those artists for handing me concepts that, you know, as a suburban white kid amongst all, you know, well off white people, that I just wouldn't have known about. And it opened my eyes to so many things and made me want to explore so many other areas of the world just to get to know what the hell is going on out there. And I love that artists are thinking about the global community and really putting their moral principles at the forefront. The Accidentals, the shirt that Jay is wearing, is a perfect example. I mean, they get out there and they are unapologetic, and they were amazing Michigan band. And they gather a tribe because of it, because of the people who see it say, I am the person, the kind of person that likes this, or I am not the type of person that likes this. And therefore they channel all these people to them. Yeah, another thing that I love is to see an artist's creative expression through, yeah, Jay, you said it, through video. I think like the Canvas on Spotify is a really cool thing. You don't need to have insane gear in order to create something cool. And you just get a deeper sense of what an artist is about. And I think that that's a really awesome thing.
Yeah.
So, at what point in a band's career do you think that they should have a discussion about branding?
Well, I would say from day one.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things is, and you touched on this, James, when I was in high school sketching out logos, the Ramones logo on my Peachy, those logos, you don't think about it at the time, but man, they're super important, and people like to identify with things. And I would think about, a logo, like, would you want to wear that on a shirt? Do you want to see people in the crowd wearing that on a shirt? I see people wearing shirts today, young people wearing shirts of bands that they couldn't possibly have, grown up with, or they'll buy them at Target or whatever, whether it's, like I mentioned, the Ramones logo. And I love that, because these logos are just iconic, and if you can get a logo, not everybody's going to have a logo as great as the Rolling Stones, that's just, stands the test of time. But I think logos are super important. And one other thing is that people forget today is, when we're talking about putting your music onto digital service providers, and there's all that competition, you're also up alongside your favorite artists. And what I mean by that is, if James puts out a song, he could literally have his album next to Crosby, Stills and Nash. When you're putting your music up online that week and they put the new releases up, man, you got to be buttoned up with your branding. You got to be buttoned up with your sound, because you might be alongside of, Drake and the Chainsmokers and Billie Eilish. And I'm telling you, I've seen this happen with our developing artists. And if your artwork is killer, and your logo and your branding and your colors and your imagery, and people go to their DSP of choice, you're going to stand out and they're going to see you. But the moral to that story is, you're going to be now alongside of your heroes. You got to be buttoned up.
Yeah. People are getting sharper with their abilities. Kids having access to these incredible tools from a very young age, and they know how to, program an app by the age 12 or something like that. It's just,
right.
It's insane how savvy people are getting. It's just like, it's on the parabolic curve. It's just, the singularity is near, it's coming. It's like,
yeah,
you gotta be on point. And so much good stuff is coming out, so much good stuff. And the proliferation of the internet leveling the playing field has made it so that so much good stuff is coming out in all areas. And if you are half-baked, you're going to get ignored. And like I was saying before, with all of this information coming at us, we've just become so good at not seeing the things that we feel subconsciously are going to waste our time. We just don't have enough time in our days. So having good branding is the antidote to that. And I think that you should have that conversation immediately. I almost feel like the concept for a band, the branding should develop with the concept of a band almost, before the band is even formed. It kind of feels like a movie script. It's like, it's going to be about this and it's going to be about this. So I think it's a very, very important thing to tackle as soon as humanly possible. That's my thought.
I agree 100%.
Well, let's go backwards then. Let's say we didn't do that, and we've been a band together for 5-10 years, and we got a couple records out, and we don't have a logo, and we don't have an established. What would be an easy checklist or a way that we could get our brand buttoned up, as you said?
Well, it's never too late, right? It's never too late. But I agree with James. I mean, ideally, you want it to be earlier. I used to manage business for Warner Music Group for Amazon. And one of the stories I heard there is that Jeff Bezos doesn't like PowerPoint. So what if you had a new idea for a vertical, for example, he would say, show me the press release, write the press release. And I would say that with music as well. You've got a new band, show me the press release for when you're releasing your album. What does it say? What does it say about you? What does it say about your branding? What does it say about those things? And by crafting that mock press release, I think that'll help you craft your brand. But to your point, we see this all the time where bands will change direction. Look at the band Ministry. You want to look at bands. You don't have to follow down a certain road. We talked about the Ramones. We love the Ramones. They stuck to their plan pretty much all the way through their career. But then, you look at these other artists and they're constantly changing direction. So if you don't have a brand or you don't like your brand, it's never too late.
Yep. Never too late. I'm thinking about Josh Tillman and Father John Misty quite a bit because he's one of my faves. But in terms of the branding story, it's funny because his branding is, I don't give a damn about branding. I'm the anti-brand. That is such a brand.
Right.
But he was out on the scene for years under the name, I believe it was Joshua Tillman. I think that just his own name. And you look at his albums and they're just, they look great, but to me, at least as I look back, I didn't even know who he was before Father John Misty happened, but it's like, you look back, there's no narrative happening. It's just a guy with a guitar, kind of like the jazz album covers. But, very successful musician. He was in the Fleet Foxes, he's definitely out there in the world, and decided that a rebrand was the thing to do. And look what happened, I kind of think of it as like clearing the runway. It's just like getting your branding in order gets all the crap out of the way so that you can really move fast. And if you didn't do it when you started, it's never too late to start. Never too late. So there are a ton of resources. Cyber PR is a great, Ariel Hyatt has so much good stuff about branding that you can look up through her site. There's a ton of stuff out there that, perhaps look to some folks that can help you set on a path of, step by step. How can you brand yourself?
Yeah, I'll add that Jay is an excellent resource for that type of information as well. And has a podcast as well as a mailing list with all kinds of music industry news. Jay, you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Thank you for the plug. Checks in the mail. I curate a newsletter called Your Morning Coffee, and if you just go to yourmorning.coffee, that's the easiest website URL. Yourmorning.coffee. You can subscribe for free. I've been doing it for about 7 years. Started off as just a couple hundred artists and managers, and now it's like 15,000, and it's just been a joy. And then I do, for the last year and a half, I've done a podcast companion to that every Monday called Your Morning Coffee. And then for about the last 7 years, I've done a podcast with Mike Brandvold called Music Biz Weekly. And that's really more for DIY, the do-it-yourself, the indie developing artists, where we talk about, well, what is Triller? What is the Music Modernization Act? What do I need to know about optimizing for socials? And, we just try to give guidance to people who are just starting out. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. Your Morning Coffee, the newsletter, it's all free.
Great. We have a question coming in from Audrey. It says, I guess, and I should say this now too, that if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them. There's a Q&A feature in the Zoom meeting, or I'm watching the Facebook stream too. And all of this will be available again later, so you'll be able to reference it as well. So coming from Audrey, she says, is it important for people to see your face in some way for a first album?
I don't know. You look at artists like Christopher Cross, they kept his face off of things for a reason. He didn't look like Brad Pitt, and he had a beautiful voice. So, there's definitely a strategy there. I just think that we're such visual beings. And as James said earlier, if you're going to have, social media, for example, and videos, it's super challenging to not have that. I think as visual beings, we like to see, I know I do, if I heard a song, let's say on a playlist, and I'm listening to a playlist, I'm like, wow, what is that? I'm going to go to that person's, let's say I'm listening to Spotify. I may go to their Spotify for artists and see if they have a bio and see if they have any images there. If they don't, I think I might be a little disappointed. I want to get a sense of, what this is. I don't know. That's just me.
Yeah. I would say it depends on what your narrative is. If you are going for the mystique thing, then that's maybe a reason you don't want to show your face. But if you're not, then I think it's very helpful. We're social beings. We relate, tribally, and it's very helpful to see what somebody looks like. Although just your physical appearance isn't enough to create a narrative, so you can't rely on that only. But I think it's pretty important. Like you're saying, you're going to go check them out on a social media platform, and it's helpful to see what they look like. Does your face need to be on the front cover of your first album? No. I mean, I at least that's my opinion.
I agree. Yeah.
I think probably a majority of my favorite artists don't have their faces on the front cover of their first album.
Yeah.
I personally,
one of my favorite album covers is the Beatles American version of Hard Day's Night, where it's just the top part of their eyes, and showed the four of them. And you didn't really see, that was one of the first album covers I remember seeing as a small kid in my mom's album collection. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, because you knew they looked cool, but you didn't see the full face. So all of the above, right? I'm same with you, James. Some of my favorite album covers are just a photo or imagery artwork of something that I really like. And you don't necessarily have to have your face plastered on the front of everything.
Great. All right, guys. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. And before we wrap things up, I just want to say, is there anything else that we're leaving out here that we haven't talked about yet that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, I have something I'd like to share with the audience. And that is The End of America has Night is Alive out. And a plug for James. I really dig this band. And if you haven't heard them, you need to listen to their music. It's super cool. So
thank you for that. That's nice. We're like making what we make, and we are very connected to the Michigan music industry. We are represented by Fleming Artists, which is a Michigan-based booking agency. So nothing but love for Michigan.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this conversation tonight.
Thank you.
It's been a true pleasure of mine. Thank you. So once again, Jay Gilbert from Label Logic and from Your Morning Coffee, and James Downs from The End of America. Is the new album out now? Is that what I just heard?
Yeah, on the 12th.
On the 12th.
That's right. Yep. And actually, just want to mention that myself, I've been doing a sort of like in the same vein that Jay's talking about, a newsletter for DIY artists called Forest Park DIY. You can find it at forestparkdiy.com. And it's just all about getting information to artists that are in the beginning phases of their career, just to avoid the steps that I've taken that have been bad, and to point towards the places that I know are good. So would love to chat with anybody, and, hit me up by looking through that website, my contact info. I love helping DIY musicians just figure things out. It's a crazy world out there, and we are one community, and we should be helping each other out.
Yeah, I have to agree
Absolutely.
with that. That's what it's all about. And in fact, that's what the Michigan Music Alliance is all about as well. And it's nice to see a community that is really all about helping each other out and spreading the information. And I know myself personally, probably same thing. I remember when I was first starting, I remember thinking, I wish there was somebody that could help me with this stuff. And now at this point in my career, I keep thinking, I wish people had told me this stuff, you know.
Exactly.
So it's so great to have you guys here this evening, and it's also great to have the Michigan Music Alliance and the B-side sessions. They'll be back on December 13th with the next B-side session about understanding contracts. So on behalf of the Michigan Music Alliance, I want to thank all of our viewers tonight, and we will see you all next time. Have a good night.
Take care.